Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari. Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Bhajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Bhajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Mr. Paramahansa, Parudika Charja, Ashtotar, the Sri Srimad, Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Mr. Paramahansa, Parudika Charja, Ashtotar, the Sri Srimad, Divine Grace, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta, Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glory to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On this 31st day of January 2022 in San Diego, reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we're in chapter 1, entitled Observing the Armies on the Battlefield of Kuruksetra. And we're in text 15 at the bottom of page 40. Panchajanyam Hrsikesho Devadattam Dhananjaya Poundram Dadhmau Mahashankam Bhimakarma Vrakodaraha Panchajanyam Hrsikesho Devadattam Dhananjaya Poundram Dadnau Mahashankam Bhimakarma Vrakodaraha Panchajanyam Hrsikesho Devadattam Dhananjaya Poundram Dadnau Mahashankam Bhimakarma Vrakodaraha Panchajanyam Hrsikesho Devadattam Dhananjaya Poundram Dadmau Mahashankam Bhimakarma Vrakodaraha Panchajanyam Hrsikesho Devadattam Dhananjaya Poundram Dadnau Mahashankam Bhimakarma Vrakodaraha Panchajanyam Hrsikesho Devadattam Mahanjaya Poundram Dadnau Mahashankam Bhimakarma Vrakodaraha. In the back. Panchajanyam Hrsikesho Devadattam Dhananjaya Poundram Dadnau Mahashankam Bhimakarma Vrakodaraha. Ladies? Panchajanyam Hrsikesho Devadattam Dhananjaya Poundram Dadnau Mahashankam Bhimakarma Vrakodaraha Panchajanyam Hrsikesho Devadattam Dhananjaya Poundram Dadnau Mahashankam Bhimakarma Vrakodaraha. Anyone in Zoom?
Panchajanyam Hrsikesho
Panchajanyam Hrsikesho
Devadattam Dhananjaya
Devadattam Dhananjaya
Poundram Dadmo Mahashankam
Poundram Dadnau Mahashankam
Bhimakarma Vrakodaraha
Bhimakarma Vrakodaraha Panchajanyam. All right, sorry, I'll read them since you all have a book. I'll read them through, and you can just read along. Panchajanyam, the conch shell named Panchajanya Hrsikesha, Krishna, the Lord who directs the senses of the devotees. Devadattam, the conch shell named Devadatta. Dhananjaya, Arjuna, the winner of wealth. Poundram, the conch named Poundra. Dadmau, blue. Mahashankam, the terrific conch shell. Bhimakarma, one who performs Herculean tasks. Vrika Udara, the voracious eater. Bhima. Vrika actually means a wolf. He eats like a wolf. Okay. Translation. Lord Krishna blew his conch shell called Panchajanya. Arjuna blew his, the Devadatta. And Bhima, the voracious eater and performer of Herculean tasks, blew his terrific conch shell called Poundra. Purport. Lord Krishna is referred to as Hrsikesa in this verse because he is the owner of all senses. The living entities are part and parcel of him, and therefore the senses of the living entities are also part and parcel of his senses. The impersonalists cannot account for the senses of the living entities, and therefore they are always anxious to describe all living entities as senseless or impersonal. The Lord, situated in the hearts of all living entities, directs their senses, but he directs in terms of the surrender of the living entity. And in the case of a pure devotee, he directly controls the senses. Here on the battlefield of Kuruksetra, the Lord directly controls the transcendental senses of Arjuna, and thus his particular name of Hrsikesa. The Lord has different names according to his different activities. For example, his name is Madhusudana because he killed the demon of the name Madhu. His name is Govinda because he gives pleasure to the cows and to the senses. His name is Vasudeva because he appeared as the son of Vasudeva. His name is Devaki Nandana because he accepted Devaki as his mother. His name is Yashodanandana because he awarded his childhood pastime to Yashoda at Vrindavan. His name is Parthasarathi because he worked as a charioteer of his friend Arjuna. Similarly, his name is Hrsikesa because he gave direction to Arjuna on the battlefield of Kuruksetra. Arjuna is referred to as Dhananjaya in this verse because he helped his elder brother in fetching wealth when it was required by the king to make expenditures for different sacrifices. Similarly, Bhima is known as Vrikodara because he could eat as voraciously as he could perform Herculean tasks, such as killing the demon Hidimba. So the particular types of conch shell blown by the different personalities on the side of the Pandavas, beginning with the lords, were all very encouraging to the fighting soldiers. On the other side, there were no such credits, nor the presence of Lord Krishna, the supreme director, nor that of the goddess of fortune. So they were predestined to lose the battle, and that was the message announced by the sounds of the conch shells. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnanandjana Shalakaya Chukshu Unmidatam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and to all members of Sri Parampara, the disciplic succession. So it certainly seems like the battle is about to begin here. The blowing of the conch shells is usually the last thing that happens before they engage. But that's not exactly what's going to happen. Because Arjuna, this is a special situation. Arjuna has fought so many different battles in so many different places. But this one is special because so many of his friends and relatives and his very teacher is on the other side. And so when he asks Krishna to take his chariot between the two armies in what they call the no man's land, to see who has come to fight, he has a change of heart. He sees all of these dear people and relatives and everything, and then he says, I can't fight. What would be the point of trying to enjoy a kingdom after this huge battle, which would be soaked with the blood of the people who I love? He had all this logic down, and he even quoted Shastra about how you kill all the men, the women will be unprotected, then there'll be unwanted progeny, and the whole society will go to hell, and I'll be responsible. I'll go to hell with him. So he had all these arguments down, and we'll see what happens in the end. This whole chapter is dedicated to that in the beginning of the second chapter. But then he changes the dynamic, because instead of arguing with Krishna as a friend, he surrenders to him as a disciple. And that's when the instruction of the Bhagavad Gita actually begins. But this is a very dramatic setting. How often do you have? I mean, we have so many conversations in all of our books. The Srimad Bhagavatam, of course, conversation within conversation within conversations, and generally at the place of Naimisharanya, on the bank of the Ganges, where Uddhava heard his lessons from Krishna, a very peaceful area. But this is in the middle of this battlefield, and so it's a very unique spot in which to give this important instruction that Krishna is going to give. But it's also, I don't want to say symbolic, but indicative that we're all on the battlefield. Prabhupada mentioned that one time. We're all on the battlefield here in the material world. And we keep losing the battle. We're with our worst enemy, the mind, which is telling us to do all kinds of things that are not good for us. And if we have no other instruction, no knowledge, then we fall victim to the senses and the mind and these allurements from lifetime after lifetime. So we have to be warriors. We'll see at the end, Prabhupada talks about that and to conquer the senses. Krishna, at the end of chapter 3, there's this section on lust, and Krishna says, this is your real enemy, the internal enemy, not these external. If you can conquer over your senses, which are vehicles of expressing lust, and direct them toward serving Krishna, then you can actually be victorious on this battlefield and go back to Godhead. So that's a wonderful dramatic setup for the Bhagavad Gita. Okay, any comments or questions on this dramatic blowing of conch shells? And we're going to read more about the conch shells in this next verses. Anantavidayam Raja Kunti Putro Yudhishthiraha Nakula Sahadevascha Sugosha Manipushpakao Kasyascha Padameshvasa Shikandi Chamaharataha Drishtadjumno Viratascha Satyakis Chaparajitaha Drupado Draupadeyascha Sarvasha Pratavipate Saubhadrascha Mahabahu Shankan Dadnu Patak Patak. King Yudhishthir, the son of Kunti, blew his conch shell, the Ananta Vijay, and Nakula and Sahadev blew the Sughosh and the Manipushpaka. That great archer, the king of Kashi, the great fighter Shikandi, Drishtadyumna, Virata, the unconquerable Satyaki, Drupada, the sons of Draupadi, and others, O king, such as the mighty-armed son of Subhadra, all blew their respective conch shells. Purport. Sanjay informed King Dhritarashtra very tactfully that his unwise policy of deceiving the sons of Pandu and endeavoring to enthrone his own sons on the seat of the kingdom was not very laudable. The signs already clearly indicated that the whole Kuru dynasty would be killed in that great battle, beginning with the grandsire, Bhishma, down to the grandsons like Abhimanyu and others, including kings from many states of the world. All were present there, and all were doomed. The whole catastrophe was due to King Dhritarashtra, because he encouraged the policy followed by his sons. So you can just try to hear this tumult of this conch shells. It's described in the next verse. And I was just thinking how nicely we're chanting now. You know, that the very vibration of the verses of the Bhagavad Gita is very auspicious. And we have a very nice section over here. Chanting, everyone is chanting so nicely, so it's very auspicious. And we can go on, let's see what happens. Very exciting. So Gosho Datarastranam Vidiyani Vyadariyat Nabascha Patavinchaiva Tumalo Vyanunadayan. The blowing of these different conch shells became uproarious, vibrating both in the sky and on the earth. It shattered the hearts of the sons of Dhritarashtra. Purport. When Bhishma and the others on the side of Duryodhana blew their respective conch shells, there was no heartbreaking on the part of the Pandavas. Such occurrences are not mentioned, but in this particular verse, it is mentioned that the hearts of the sons of Dhritarashtra were shattered by the sounds vibrated by the Pandavas' party. This is due to the Pandavas and their confidence in Lord Krishna. One who takes shelter of the Supreme Lord has nothing to fear, even in the midst of the greatest calamity. So notice that word tumulo. You don't have to be a linguist to understand the relation between that word and the word tumultuous. There are quite a few words in Sanskrit that have their cognates in English. The most famous of which is nama, Hare Nama. Who can forget And matra for mother. There's many like that. The Sanskrit is the root of all languages. So this shows the special quality of transcendental sound and this blowing of the conch shells. And it's even though the Pandava side is outnumbered, and on the other side you have the great fighter Bhishma, and Karna is there, and Drona, and by normal calculation, the Pandavas are doomed. But because Krishna's on their side, there's no way they're going to lose the battle. And that's an important part of Krishna's preaching. He said, these people are doomed anyway. You can't save them. You know, all you can do is do your duty, and in this way you'll be exalted, and you'll be on the right side. Otherwise, you'll never be happy if you actually give up the duty. Okay, moving on. Ata vyavasitan drishtva datarastran kapidvajaha pravritte shastra sampate dano udhyamya pandavaha Hrsikesam tada vakyam idamaha mahipate. At that time, Arjuna, the son of Pandu, seated in the chariot bearing the flag marked with Hanuman, took up his bow and prepared to shoot his arrows. O king, after looking at the sons of Dhritarashtra drawn in military array, Arjuna then spoke to Lord Krishna these words. So this is a critical point where he doesn't actually shoot the arrows. Purport: the battle was just about to begin. It is understood from the above statement that the sons of Dhritarashtra were more or less disheartened by the unexpected arrangement of military force by the Pandavas, who were guided by the direct instructions of Lord Krishna on the battlefield. The emblem of Hanuman on the flag of Arjuna is another sign of victory, because Hanuman cooperated with Lord Ram in the battle between Ram and Ravana, and Lord Ram emerged victorious. Now both Ram and Hanuman were present on the chariot of Arjuna to help him. Lord Krishna is Ram himself, and wherever Lord Ram is, his eternal servitor Hanuman and his eternal consort Sita, the goddess of fortune, are present. Therefore, Arjuna had no cause to fear any enemies whatsoever. And above all, the Lord of the senses, Lord Krishna, was personally present to give him direction. Thus all good counsel was available to Arjuna in the matter of executing the battle. In such auspicious conditions, arranged by the Lord for his eternal devotee, lay the signs of assured victory. So the only way in which they could lose the battle is if they couldn't lose the battle, but Arjuna himself could be degraded if he actually left the battlefield. This is what's going to happen. And so he's going to ask Krishna to, as we see, I want to see who wants to fight, who's on the other side. And as soon as he looks over there and he sees his friends and his cousins and his teacher, he gets cold feet. And we'll read about that. Let's try to see if we can finish this chapter. We'll get near it. Arjuna vacha Senayoda bhayor madhye Vatam stapayamechyuta Yavadetan niriksheham Yodhukaman avastitan Karmaya sahayodhabhyam Asmin Ranasamudyame. Arjuna said, O infallible one, please draw my chariot between the two armies so that I may see those present here who desire to fight and with whom I must contend in this great trial of arms. Purport: although Lord Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, out of his causeless mercy he was engaged in the service of his friend. He never fails in his affection for his devotees, and thus he is addressed herein as infallible. As charioteer, he had to carry out the orders of Arjuna, and since he did not hesitate to do so, he is addressed as infallible. Although he had accepted the position of a charioteer for his devotee, his supreme position was not challenged. In all circumstances, he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hrsikesa, the Lord of the total senses. The relationship between the Lord and his servitor is very sweet and transcendental. The servitor is always ready to render service to the Lord, and similarly, the Lord is always seeking an opportunity to render some service to the devotee. He takes greater pleasure in his pure devotees assuming the advantageous position of ordering him than he does in being the giver of orders. Since he is the master, everyone is under his orders, and no one is above him to order him. But when he finds that a pure devotee is ordering him, he obtains transcendental pleasure, although he is the infallible master in all circumstances. As a pure devotee of the Lord, Arjuna had no desire to fight with his cousins and brothers. Actually, this has been fixed, cousins. Because if you talk about his brothers, then you immediately think of the other Pandavas. He had no desire to fight with his cousins, but he was forced to come onto the battlefield by the obstinacy of Duryodhana, who was never agreeable to any peaceful negotiation. Therefore, he was very anxious to see who the leading persons present on the battlefield were. Although there was no question of a peacemaking endeavor on the battlefield, he wanted to see them again and to see how much they were bent upon demanding an unwanted war. So Prabhupada makes some wonderful points here. This position that Krishna takes of serving his devotee here, this is you'll see this in the Leela, or coming under the control. This is perfectly expressed most famously as Krishna's surrendering to Yashoda. We had, a few months ago, we had our Damodar month, and every day we were singing that song. And it's all about Damodar, who is under the control of his mother. He's bound up, and he's enjoying it. He says in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, in chapter 4 of the Adi Leela, he describes this, that when my gopis, when they chastise me in a sulky mood, this steals my mind away from the heart of from the chanting of the Vedic hymns. Because there's so much worship of Krishna, which is good, in the mood of supplication or the mood of glorification, but in the mood of servanthood. But he's more attracted when it's more an intimate mood of friendship or parenthood or even conjugal love. So that's unique amongst the Gaudiya Vaishnav, is to exalt, most like, as Lord Chaitanya said, the greatest devotees are the gopis. Why? Because they were ready to break all convention in order to serve Krishna as he wanted. You see? And there's a wonderful song at the end of the Shikshastika, very end of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, where Lord Chaitanya is explaining the last verse, where Radharani, she's praying, Ashlishya paradhatang pinashtamama darshanan mamahatang karotu bhayata tata bhavadadhatu lampato mat prananatas to saheva naparaha. Let Madhava embrace this maid who's fallen at his feet, or let him trample me on my most ardent hope's defeat by never giving me a chance to see him anywhere, thus shattering my heart and plunging me into despair. You see, he is a restless libertine and not a saint, so let him act in any way he likes without restraint. Yet though his cruel and crooked ways may cause me constant woe, Krishna is the only Lord my heart shall ever know. And then Lord Chaitanya explains, and one of the statements, right, says, if Krishna wants to be with another gopi, then I'll go and take her hand and bring him to Krishna. It's not that I'll scheme and figure out a way to keep them separated, which is a material thing, you see? Because her only motive is to please Krishna. If Krishna really wants, so that's the gold standard, the highest standard. And here, as explained, Srila Prabhupada explains, that he's more pleased when his devotees are trying to control him out of love. His mother was binding him, but because she didn't want to get him to get into trouble, And so what happened? He got into more trouble. There's this, he pulled down these two trees, crashing sounds, and miraculously no one was hurt. Right? So there's a expansion of this in the Gopal Champu by Jiva Goswami. He is explaining that Mother Yashoda was mortified when that happened, because she's at home and she realized what happened, and she felt she was responsible because she tied him to that mortar, thinking that he would be, but somehow he pulled it. And so she was at home, and Nanda Maharaj came and untied him and said, well, who did this? Mother did it. And Nanda was upset, So they go back. So Krishna picked up on his mood and said, I'm not going to see her anymore. So, well, how are you going to drink? What milk are you going to drink? I'll just drink cow's milk. I'm not going to drink breast milk anymore. And so Nanda Maharaj was worried, he's becoming estranged from Yashoda. So what did he do? Very wise. He picked up a stick. He said, I'm going to beat her now. And Krishna says, "Oh, no, no." And so he ran to his mother and ran into her lap. So this is what Krishna does eternally. This is what he really relishes. Not being the master and the controller and the Hrsikesa and everything, that's his official position. But engineering, or as a maestro, as a director, these complicated and varied emotional relationships with all of his beloved devotees in Vrindavan, in Goloka Vrindavan. So this is a little sample of that. He's taken this role as the chariot driver. Now you can see how foolish Duryodhana was. There's a story in the Mahabharata before the war, and Krishna was sleeping, and Duryodhana and Arjuna both go to see Krishna, because what's going to happen? He's got all these armies and everything, So the rule was, I don't know if they knew it, but whoever he sees first, they're going to get first dibs, either his armies or him. So Duryodhana was at his feet. No, Arjuna was at his feet, and Duryodhana was at his head. He figured, if I'm at his head, then he'll see me first. But Krishna looked at his feet, and he saw Arjuna and said, "Oh, Arjuna, okay, so what would you like?" And Duryodhana says, "Oh, God, But then he was jubilant, because Arjuna took Krishna instead of the thousands and thousands of soldiers and the cavalry and all those elephants, And so Duryodhana said, "Oh, how lucky! I'm so lucky. I get the whole army. What could I use? Krishna is just one man. He didn't understand the divinity." So Arjuna he said, "I'll just stay with Krishna. Thank you." So both of them were jubilant. So we'll see. In chapter 11. When Arjuna asked to see the universal form, what's the highlight? That famous phrase where he's trembling, he's frightened. This is not the Krishna he knows. Who are you? Who are you? Does anyone know the answer? Kalosmi. It's like a voice. Maybe Raj can say, Kalosmi. He has the voice of God. You'll hear when he asks a question. But it's like, and there's a wonderful side story to this. I hate to bring this up, but the whole development of the atom bomb during World War II was under this project. What was it called? Manhattan Project. And it was this scientist, super scientist named Oppenheimer, and he happened to be a dabbler in the Bhagavad Gita. Yes, he was a student of the Bhagavad Gita. So when the first test came, they weren't absolutely positive that it wouldn't completely blow up the Earth. It might, there was a chance that everything would. They had to do it though. So Alamogordo, I think it was in New Mexico. So of course Oppenheimer was there, and it didn't blow up. But when it first blew up, he thought of that verse, "Kalosmi loka chaya." Time I am the destroyer of everyone. I've come to destroy everyone here. And I remember there was a picture. This is many years ago in Life magazine. Life magazine was a picture magazine in the 50s and 60s. I think it faded out in the 70s. And there was a picture of Robert Oppenheimer's table near where he slept, and there was a little murti of Krishna. He had a little murti of, one of these murtis of Krishna. I don't know if he had a flute or whatever, So he recognized, what did he recognize? Not much at all. But that's the kind of power that Arjuna was seeing, this all-consuming, universal, destructive power that Krishna has. And it caused him to be frightened, and he asked Krishna, "Please resume your Saumya Vapu, in your gentle form," And Krishna came back. So there's no question of loss. As we know at the very end of the Bhagavad Gita, does anyone know that verse? Yatra yogeshwara Krishna, yatra partha danodara, tatra shri vijayo bhuti sada nitya matir mama. I think wherever there is Arjuna, wherever there is Krishna, there will always be opulence, victory, and morality. So there's no question of defeat here. But the whole point is that Krishna set a stage here. He covers Arjuna, so that Arjuna will disobey his order and be controlled by his gut reaction of love and feeling for his friends and relatives, so that the Bhagavad Gita could be spoken, so that we could benefit eternally. It comprises the essence of all the Upanishadic knowledge and wisdom in this one book. And so Srila Prabhupada saw its importance. He translated it And now we have it. Okay, any comments or questions? Okay, let us go on. Text 23. Yotyamanam aviksheham ya etetra samagataha Dhatarashtrasya durbudher Yudhe priyachikirshabha. Let me see those who have come here to fight, wishing to please the evil-minded son of Dhritarashtra. Purport. It was an open secret that Duryodhana wanted to usurp the kingdom of the Pandavas by evil plans, in collaboration with his father, Dhritarashtra. Therefore, all persons who had joined the side of Duryodhana must have been birds of the same feather. Arjuna wanted to see them on the battlefield before the fight was begun, just to learn who they were. But he had no intention of proposing peace negotiations with them. It was also a fact that he wanted to see them to make an estimate of the strength which he had to face, although he was quite confident of victory because Krishna was sitting by his side. Sanjaya Uvacha Eva Mukto Hrsikesa Gudakeshena Bharata Senayor Biho Madhye Stapiyat Bharatottamam. Sanjay said, O descendant of Bharata, having thus been addressed by Arjuna, Lord Krishna drew up the fine chariot in the midst, not in the midst, between the armies of both parties. Purport. In this verse, Arjuna is referred to as Gudakesha. Gudaka means sleep, and one who conquers sleep is called Gudakesha. Sleep also means ignorance. So Arjuna conquered both sleep and ignorance because of his friendship with Krishna. As a great devotee of Krishna, he could not forget Krishna even for a moment, because that is the nature of a devotee. Either in waking or in sleep, a devotee of the Lord can never be free from thinking of Krishna's name, form, qualities, and pastimes. Thus, a devotee of Krishna can conquer both sleep and ignorance simply by thinking of Krishna constantly. This is called Krishna consciousness or samadhi. As Hrsikesa, or the director of the senses and mind of every living entity, Krishna could understand Arjuna's purpose in placing the chariot in between the armies. Thus, he did so and spoke as follows. So this idea of conquering sleep, in our line, there's a whole series of great devotees who conquered sleep. I'm thinking of the Goswamis, and they reduce the necessities of life down to the minimal. First thing is food and shelter, right? So what do they have for shelter? A different tree every night in Vrindavan they slept under. You can imagine. And as far as food goes, they would beg what's called madhukari. You go to different places to get a little from each one, so you don't become dependent on one, you know. So you take a little here, until you have something and you offer it. There's a story, Sanatana Goswami. He had a little deity. Many of the Goswamis, they would have little deities that they would carry with them, you know. So he had a deity of Madan Mohan, and he didn't have much to offer him, you know. So he would get some flour, and I think he would mix it with water, and then put it in the sun and offer that. Or he would sometimes he'd be able to get some fire and make chapatis, but he had no salt. So one time Madan Mohan complained. Said, okay, I understand, but can you please try to have some salt on the chapatis, you know? And so Sanatana was said, where am I going to get salt, you know? I said, please try to be satisfied. I'm just, you know. So what happens? A big salt merchant is plying this big ship full of salt on the river Yamuna. And there's a storm comes, and he has to try to dock that ship, but it's dangerous, you know. So Sanatana helped him to guide him to the shore, and he was able. So out of gratitude, and because he was a Vaishnava, said, "How can I repay you?" And so he said, "Well, I don't need anything myself, but if you want to build a temple." So he helped build the temple, donated thousands of rupees, whatever it was, and they built the first of the Goswami's temples was the temple of Madan Mohan. It's still there. You can see it when you go there. So I always say it's you know, the whole salt merchant. So he had enough salt now for the chapatis. He had a whole temple actually that came. So the idea is that Krishna himself is the husband of the goddess of fortune, but often his devotees are very, very poor materially. So there was a puzzle. Why is that? Why is that? And whereas Lord Shiva, he's very poor. He doesn't even have a home. You know, he lives out under a tree, right? Always meditating in the ashes and everything. And yet his acolytes, his devotees, often become very rich. And some of these demons were his devotees. Ravana was a great devotee of Shiva. So the idea is that the devotees of Krishna, they see what real riches are. There's something called prema dhana, the wealth, the treasure of prema, far beyond any material wealth. And the devotees don't want it. If Raghunath Das Goswami, he would be like a billionaire today. His uncle was called, what was it? Hiranya Majumdar. Hiranya means gold. They were big landowners, and he was the only heir. And they married him to a lady who was the goddess of fortune, very pure, chaste, and beautiful. But he lost interest. When he saw Lord Chaitanya, became attracted, he put on that festival for Nityananda, the Chiradari festival, which we observe every year. And he was blessed with Lord Nityananda. Yes, you will soon be able to go and join Lord Chaitanya. And so he, although he was so wealthy externally, and he could have been wealthy, he became the emblem of renunciation, even more than the other Goswamis. You know, he would eat every other day, a little handful of buttermilk or something, you know. And he lived to be over 90 years old, but very thin, you know. But he was the I think Priyojana Acharya. He had some wonderful literatures. He wrote a beautiful poem called the Manak Shiksha, which is instructions to the mind. A very nice edition of that was put out by Urmila Dasi. She got a lot of the commentaries, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and she also had some leading of our ISKCON devotees, right? Shivaram Swami wrote some nice realizations about it. So the idea is that the devotees know where real wealth lies, and not in this world, not with money. That's they regard it as poison, you know, to try to accumulate wealth for that. So they live as simply as possible, show by their lives how one can be totally renounced. The real wealth of is the Vairagya Vidyanija bhakti-yoga. This is Lord Chaitanya's teachings. And so that's a prerequisite really for chanting the verse in a helpless way and successfully. A very important prayer of Queen Kunti in this regard, where she says, Janmaishaya Shuta Shribe Edamana Badak Praman Naibar Hatta Bidhadan Dvaitrama Kinchana Gochara. This word Kinchana Gochara is a name for Krishna, means the property of the propertyless, those who don't claim any material property. So what this verse says is, my dear Lord, you are easily approachable, but only by those who are free of any material desires. Because those who are aspiring for and working for the four main opulences, Janmaishaya Shuddhashibhi, it means a good birth, an aristocratic family, wealth, of course, and high education and physical beauty, they cannot call upon you with deep feeling. You see? If they're too involved in getting and spending and owing all this, they may chant Hare Krishna, which is all auspicious. But they can't chant from that platform of helplessness. And Prabhupada, believe it or not, there's a verse that Lord Krishna speaks to Yudhishthira near the end of the 10th canto. Yasyaham nagunnami harshe taddanang shanai. The beginning half of the verse says, to those I show my real mercy, I take away all the material wealth. And then I leave them bereft. And even their family members don't want them anymore, and they kick them out. And so what do they have left? Just me. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna. And Prabhupada, he identified with that verse. He had his business, you know, and he was serving. He was Vaishnava. He was pure Vaishnava all the time. It was a pastime. But he had this, you know, entanglements with the family and the business, the family, and all these things. So, but then the business failed. There was a robbery. Prabhupada wasn't giving much attention to it. And then his family situation wasn't favorable to his preaching. Let's just put it that way. And finally, he had enough, you know, and he took first vanaprastha and then sannyas. Whereas if it hadn't been that way, he may never have come to America.
there's we have a lot to thank his family for not making it possible for him to preach in India. So that's the answer, is that the real wealth is not material things, but it's the wealth of love for Krishna, which is easier to attain if one is not involved in material opulences. Okay, we have time for one more. Which verse are we on now? 25. Bhishma Drona Pramukata Sarvesham Shamahikchitam Uvacha Partha Prashaitan Samavetan Kuruniti. In the presence of Bhishma, Drona, and all the other chieftains of the world, the Lord said, "Just behold, Partha, all the Kurus assembled here." Purport. As the supersoul of all living entities, Lord Krishna could understand what was going on in the mind of Arjuna. The use of the word Hrsikesa in this connection indicates that he knew everything. And the word Partha, meaning the son of Pritha or Kunti, is also similarly significant in reference to Arjuna. As a friend, Krishna wanted to inform Arjuna that because Arjuna was the son of Pritha, the sister of his own father, Vasudeva, he had agreed to be the charioteer of Arjuna. Now, what did Krishna mean when he told Arjuna to behold the Kurus? Did Arjuna want to stop there and not fight? Krishna never expected such things from the son of his aunt, Pritha. The mind of Arjuna was thus predicted by the Lord in friendly joking. All right, now next. Tatra pashyat stithan partha pitrin ata pitamahan acharyan matulan bratrin putran pautran saking stata Shvashuran suridas chaiva senayor bayorapi. Now just one note before we go read the translation. You see that word bratrin? Brother. It's another cognate. So in the Vedic culture, the extended family also often included cousins and so forth. And so the cousins are sometimes called bratrins. And that's why Prabhupada had this phrase, cousin brothers. But because Arjuna has his own brothers on the battlefield, it's clearer if we just use the word cousins. But we'll see what happens here. There Arjuna could see within the midst of the armies of both parties his fathers, grandfathers, teachers, maternal uncles, brothers, sons, grandsons, friends, and also his fathers-in-law and well-wishers. Purport. On the battlefield, Arjuna could see all kinds of relatives. He could see persons like Bhurishrava, who were his father's contemporaries, grandfathers Bhishma and Somadatta, teachers like Dronacharya and Kripacharya, maternal uncles like Shalya and Shokuni, brothers like Duryodhana, sons like Lakshmana, friends like Ashwatthama, well-wishers like Kritavarma, etc. He could see also the armies which contained many of his friends. Tan samikshasya sakanteha sarvan bandhun abastitan kripaya padayavishto vishidan nidam abravit. When the son of Kunti, Arjuna, saw all these different grades of friends and relatives, he became overwhelmed with compassion and spoke thus. Arjuna vacha dristvemam swajanam Krishna yuyutsum samapastitam sidanti mama gatrani mukam cha parishusyati. Arjuna said, "My dear Krishna, seeing my friends and relatives present before me in such a fighting spirit, I feel the limbs of my body quivering and my mouth drying up." Purport. Any man who has genuine devotion to the Lord has all the good qualities which are found in godly persons or in the demigods, whereas the non-devotee, however advanced he may be in material qualifications by education and culture, lacks in godly qualities. As such, Arjuna, just after seeing his kinsmen, friends, and relatives on the battlefield, was at once overwhelmed by compassion for them who had so decided to fight amongst themselves. As far as his soldiers were concerned, he was sympathetic from the beginning, but he felt compassion even for the soldiers of the opposite party, foreseeing their imminent death. And while he was so thinking, the limbs of his body began to quiver, and his mouth became dry. He was more or less astonished to see their fighting spirit. Practically the whole community, all blood relatives of Arjuna, had come to fight with him. This overwhelmed a kind devotee like Arjuna. Although it is not mentioned here, still one can easily imagine that not only were Arjuna's bodily limbs quivering and his mouth drying up, but he was also crying out of compassion. Such symptoms in Arjuna were not due to weakness, but to his soft-heartedness, a characteristic of a pure devotee of the Lord. It is said, therefore, Yasyasti bhakti, I'll say you say, Yasyasti bhakti bhagavata kinchana sarvair gunais tatta samasate suraha harava bhakta sukuto mahadguna manodate nasati dhavato bahihi. One who has unflinching devotion for the personality of Godhead has all the good qualities of the demigods, but one who is not a devotee of the Lord has only material qualifications that are of little value. This is because he is hovering on the mental plane and is certain to be attracted by the glaring material energy. Bhagavatam 5:18-12. So it's almost time to adjourn. But this is, now Arjuna is now revealing his heart, which is that he really doesn't want to fight. And this is all part of Krishna's plan, of course. But this sets up the whole speaking of the Bhagavad Gita. And the rest of this chapter, Arjuna will give his argument why he shouldn't fight and won't fight. And but yet he doesn't get off the chariot. He sits down on the chariot, and at the beginning of the next chapter, he takes shelter of Krishna. And then the Bhagavad Gita is going to be spoken. Okay. Any final comments or questions? Sureshwar? Not tonight. Maybe tomorrow. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hari Hari Bol.